What does mathematics really need right now? More access, better communication, and a deeper understanding that math has always been about people. In this episode, we talk with former MAA President Hortensia Soto about leadership in the mathematics community, the politics of access, embodied learning, and why teaching math is about much more than getting the right answer. This is a conversation about connection, curiosity, and the human side of mathematics. But before we begin, the views shared in this conversation are Hortensia's own and do not necessarily reflect the views of her employer or any institution she works with or is affiliated with. So to start, I'm Autumn Fineff, joined by my co-host, Noah John Syracusa, and this is Breaking Math.
Hortensia, you've served as the president of the Mathematical Association of America. What was the vantage point from that position of the mathematical community?
Yeah, it was very interesting and exciting. And I think for me, the thing that I realized, especially as I traveled around to different section meetings and different conferences, is just how small our math community really is. And it always seemed like I'd meet a new person, but then we had a person in common. And for example, Noah, that just happened today when you and I met. It's like, oh, we have a colleague of mine is a friend of Noah's or an acquaintance of Noah's. And so for me, I just was always just amazed about how somehow we're all connected and it's mathematics that ties us together. And I really like that. And it also gave me an opportunity to say, so you know so and so, so you must know so and so. And again, it's just all these connections that we have through people because of mathematics. And I love that.
Now, I'm curious, what do you think mathematicians need most right now from professional societies?
Yeah, I think certainly AI is big and it's controversial, and some people love it, some people are concerned, some people are scared. But I think that right now is the biggest thing that mathematicians need, and probably other scholars, is how do we leverage AI because it's not going away, so we can't just ignore it. But really think about how we can use it for our research, for our teaching, for our service that we do. And I think that we need evidence-based, research evidence-based practices of how best to use that. And I know some people are starting to work on that, but we have a long ways to go to learn about that.
What do you think about or how do we handle the pace? Because when
Hmm.
we try to do evidence based research, a lot of times people even laugh, like someone will put out a paper saying, oh, look, AI is really bad at helping students. And then it turns out it's a model from a year ago and they've completely changed. So, how do we keep up?
Yeah, or a model from a month ago that
Yeah,
I have
true.
I have a graduate student actually who's doing her research on the role of AI to help students with writing proofs. And she got to a point and she's like, I just can't finish my lit review because I write it and then something new happens. And I said, you just have to stop and go from what you have. It's hard to keep up with the pace. And yes, I think that the evidence based research is going to be difficult because of the pace. And so I think just anything that we can do, even if it's at a small scale, but then try to branch that up to any time that a new version comes out of AI that's more sophisticated, and branching out those methods to learn is important. And that's why communication is so important, so that we can learn what other people are doing in terms of using AI and what they're learning from it. Because I think we have a lot of information about here's how I'm using it in my classroom, or here's how I'm using it in my research. But then how do we branch that out so others can learn about those techniques that practitioners are using?
Now, with AI being so political in the classroom, some folks want to use it. Others want to use traditional methods of just lecturing. I find that to be very interesting, especially when math has a bit of a reputation for transcending politics. It's about theorems and proof, but there's no room for subjectivity, really. But we know that reality is quite different. Now, do you think math gets political?
Mhm.
If so, where does that happen?
Yeah, so I mean, right now, sadly, our country makes everything political. And everything can be political. I mean, for whatever reason, and I think things become political a lot of times because of funding. And I think really what has happened with mathematics is that the conversation is not about mathematics per se, but more about access to mathematics. And really, I think if we get down to the nuts and bolts of a lot of things that are political and that have become bipartisan, it really is about the access, the who has it, who doesn't have it, who gets to have it, who doesn't get to have it, why do they get to have it, why don't they get to have it. And in this case, we're talking about mathematics, but the it can be anything. It doesn't just have to be mathematics. And so I think that the things that have become political are really because of access and because I have access to mathematics. And the way that I got access to mathematics really makes me think about the responsibility that we have. And I'm also in a position that I can give access to others. And I don't really believe in that I get to give access to others. I get to provide opportunities. That's what I think I get to do. I don't actually give access to mathematics to anyone. But I do believe that we all have a responsibility. Because I have access, that I have a responsibility to give others opportunities to have access to mathematics. And that once we have access to mathematics, we have a responsibility then to also engage of that. This means I need to work. I think a lot of people don't realize how much work it really takes to actually do mathematics. And so there's a responsibility that I think that we all carry in conversations about access to anything, whatever the it is that we're talking about. And in mathematics, I feel like I have a responsibility to create opportunities for students to learn mathematics, and that means engage with it. That means struggle with it. And anyone who's in my classroom, if they want access to it, it means that they have to work hard. And I think people don't realize that this access to anything is a two-way street. It's like, yeah, we get in the door, but once we get in the door, people aren't just like handing things to us. They aren't pouring knowledge into our brain. There's something that we need to do on that end once we get into the door. And I fear those are the things that have really made mathematics political. But that's what's making people claim that mathematics is political.
Hortensia, one example that you're talking about access, and one example that's really stayed with me for many years actually came back to my first faculty job. We had a meeting where someone was saying, we have to design our math major so that a student can come in without having had AP calculus and graduate in 4 years. And it's amazing because this was not a given. Like a lot of departments, it's kind of assumed like, oh, if you're a math major, you're going to have lots of calculus and you're going to skip ahead to linear algebra and this and that, because we envision the sort of very advanced student coming from high school, going on to grad school. And we actually had to say, no, math majors, like the idea of majoring in math needs to be accessible to anyone, because there's a lot of students who go to high schools that don't even offer AP Calc. And that really profoundly touched me, that we just have to break our stereotype of who has access to math and who's doing math and broaden it. But as I just want to mention, that really hit me. The question I want to ask you is, what I was just mentioning is kind of being able to major in math, but let's peel it back even further. What math do you think everyone should know, right? Not everyone needs to major in math, but like, what's the math that all humans should have access to?
I think, by the way, I didn't have any AP courses.
And I'll just say, aren't we glad that you were able to go through and have the career you did? Think of what a loss we would have had if you got filtered out by stupid requirements in a system.
Yeah. And I think we need to think about who our clientele is based on where we are, because at some institutions, the students that they serve do come from such schools. And the schools that I went to, that's not the population that they were serving. They're serving rural Nebraska.
Same for me for where I teach.
Yeah, so I think that we need to not have these hard rules about what people look like if they want to do something. And with that said, yeah, they need to at least have algebra skills. That is important. Okay, but the question that you asked me is, what mathematics do I think we all should have? I think that we should all have some skills related to finance. Like, how do we budget a checkbook? Learn how to invest. And so what does all that require? Fractions, percentages. and decimals. And I don't think students really have a good understanding between those three things that really are the same thing. And because those three things help us to make decisions quickly about money, and money is power. And so I think having courses in high school about how to deal with money is important. And we don't do that. We fail our students in that regard, and our college students in that regard. They're not required to ever take anything like that. So I think anything related to finance in terms of mathematics is important. I think that's what I would put at the top of the list. That's what helps us to move forward so that we learn about, hey, I have a job and I can actually have a K and they'll match it. So I start early. Compound interest, the power of compound interest. Start early and that life can be good for you, because I think a lot of times when we talk about access, money is the thing that sometimes gives us that access. And if we don't know how to budget our money, if we don't know how to invest our money, if we don't know about percentages and the role of interest rates when we go and buy a car, buy a house, and just how that can really put us in debt. Credit cards. These are things that are really important.
It's not just the basic math, but also thinking about the factors in which the numbers help you go through life, right? So it's everything from your credit score to how social
Mhm.
media influences you in the
Yes.
decisions that you're making.
Yes.
And now it's not just social media, it's attention media.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
it's the things that are capturing your attention and why. And those algorithms and other things also matter, right?
Yeah.
So, thinking about this a little more in depth, if we're spending our careers doing mathematics,
Mhm.
we also need to be able to spend our careers explaining it or part of it publicly.
Mm,
Now, do you think we need to become better communicators as mathematicians?
definitely. Yes. So mathematicians are excellent at conveying what they know and love to other people who know and love the exact same area that they're in. Um, but they're not necessarily good at conveying it to another mathematician who doesn't do the same work that they do. And so I think a big part of the work that we do, and I think AI is really going to force us to change this also, is the way that we communicate with people. I think a lot of times we talk about communicating mathematics, but to whom? To people. And that requires that we know people, that we learn human skills, that we learn, I say emotional intelligence, because that's really what it is. It's how do we communicate with people? How do we listen to people? And a big part of communication, I think a lot of times we think about it in how are the words coming out of my mouth, and not how are they coming into my ears? Like, how do I listen? That's a big part of communicating, is also listening. So yes, I think learning human skills, learning about our audience helps us to become better communicators. And I think AI is going to really force us to do that. And I'm excited about that.
I'm curious to expand on that. So how I could see it kind of going in either direction where AI really helps us or it really sets us back. So can you
Yeah.
elaborate on what you just said?
Yeah, so I think that, let me talk about the set us back. I think for some it can become isolating. But the truth of the matter is we all need people, whether we admit it or not. And I think AI is going to be a great opportunity for different branches of mathematics to come together. And so, because of that coming together, and that we can all contribute to an idea, a concept in different ways, I think that it's an opportunity to learn from one another, to collaborate on projects from different fields with people from different fields. And that's going to require that we say, hey, the way that I'm thinking about it is this way. These are the things that are important to me. And what you're saying is actually the same thing I'm saying, and this is how we're saying it. I'm just really hopeful about that. But that's the type of person I am. I think another important thing that we miss when we teach mathematics is, what is it that mathematics is really teaching us? And it's teaching us logical skills, but we don't ever talk about that. We tend to talk about, oh, the process, we're getting this answer. But I think mathematics is a great place to learn to think logically and to communicate with other people, to work together, to collaborate, to argue for why you think a problem could be solved this way, to listen to others about how they think about math problem can be solved. And I think it's just a great place to actually learn communication skills. As teachers, I think we need to do a better job of saying, this is really helping you to think logically so that when you go out into the world and need to make other decisions, you can think logically.
I had a colleague who I asked, actually, I was hosting a different podcast and I asked, they were in computer science. I said, well, we keep hearing about how AI is taking over coding. So do you think students should still learn coding? What's the point? They're not going to need it for their jobs. And the professor said, coding is the best way to train your brain that words matter, that they have precise meanings, that you can come up with a whole architecture in your head, the idea of what you want the computer to do. You can
Mhm.
plan out almost like a floor plan, the architecture, and then you can decide what goes where and you can put the precise words. They said, I don't care if no one ever codes on their job. It is the most useful skill to learn just to train your brain. And
Yeah,
what you're describing in math sounds so similar.
it is. We're training our brain.
And
Yeah,
I think that's important is we're not just aiming for the destination. How many professional coders are there? How many professional calculus doers are there? And
yeah.
yet these are such fundamental parts of building our mental capacity.
And just learning to ask the right questions. That's what's kind of cool about AI. You can ask it something that you think you're asking it, and it gives you a stupid answer because it really just responded to the question that you asked it. And I think it's going to help us to ask better questions, more meaningful questions.
What do you think about? I've heard there's been some evidence that students are asking fewer questions in class because they're asking more questions to their chatbot. And in their chatbot, they're less afraid. Their professors may intimidate them. Do you think that's good or bad, or what are your thoughts?
I guess I don't know much about the research on that, mostly because that's not my experience.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that.
I mean, that's not my experience at all, like, for me personally or in conversations that I have with others.
So you've done a lot of leadership in the mathematics community, and you've been involved with the MAA at many levels throughout your career. So you started from Project Next early on, and then it moved to sectional leadership for the Rocky Mountain region, and then the secretary or the associate secretary,
Mhm.
and then eventually president of the organization. That's a pretty remarkable journey, especially starting from bottom up. What first drew you to the MAA community, especially through Project Next, and how did that experience really shape your career?
Yeah, the MAA has been, I mean, I love the MAA. It really has made me, and I will give it all that credit, and I will give myself credit for the work that I've done. But when I got my first master's, I was gonna look for a job before thinking about going on to get a PhD, and my advisor said, "Well, you need to join the MAA. That's where you're gonna find your job, because 'cause they'll have ads in there for people with a master's." And I always did what my advisor said, so I joined the MAA, and so I've been a member of the MAA since 1989, well before I had my PhD, and then when I did get my PhD, Project Next was just starting. I think they were in their 3rd year, and so I applied. I really didn't think I would get in. I mean, I thought, "Oh, this is something for, like, elite people from elite schools," and I got in. It really just opened a lot of doors for me, but it opened doors not because of Project Next, but because of the leaders of Project Next, the people who are leading Project Next. And so I always like to give a shout out to Jim Leitzel, who's passed away, and Christine Stevens, who spearheaded Project Next and were the founders of it. And one of the things that they always did is that for one of the upcoming meeting that we had to go to, they would pick people to kind of spearhead different sessions, and so they asked me to spearhead one, which I was just, like, shocked that they would ask me to do it. But, I mean, they saw something in me, and to this day, I have no idea what it was, But that just kind of spiraled, and I loved it. I loved the engagement with people because I love people. Maybe that's the thing that they saw, that I'm a people person. But it just became one thing after the other, and it has really just been a great, great, wonderful, beautiful, magical journey for me. The people I have met has been the best part. Putting people together has been wonderful, and saying, "Oh, you should work with so and so," and it's been great. Yeah.
So to dig into this people side a little bit more, in math we have a funny situation where we have not one but several professional societies. There's SIAM, which covers the applied and industrial math. There's the American Mathematical Society, which in principle is all of math, but it tends to have a very research and often pure math focus.
Mhm,
And the MAA, which you've been heavily involved in, is more focused on teaching. And when there is research, it's more education research.
mhm.
But let's put all that aside. I don't want to talk about like the official, like what those words stand for. I want to ask you about the culture. So what would you say, like from a cultural perspective, really defines or identifies the MA? What makes it special?
The people. I
In what
mean,
way?
yeah.
They all
So
have people. What's
yeah,
special about the
yeah.
MA people?
Well, I wanna go back to, I know you said you didn't wanna talk about, there's the pure math, the applied math, and
We can talk about it.
yeah, well, but
That's fair.
that's why I wanna talk about it, because the math were the things that came up, and here you talked about education, and we're talking about education, we're talking about people educating people about mathematics, and so that's why it's the math. The other thing that I think is just so crucial and powerful and special about the MAA is that we have core values. And any program that we do, we're always vetting it to how does it address the core values. People propose a session. We're like, how does that session propose or meet our core values? We expect people to live the core values when they attend our meeting. We expect them to live the core values if they're representing the MAA at something else. And these core values include communication. And by communication, we are talking about our publications, but we're also talking about how we communicate mathematics to others. And of course, there's the teaching and learning, which is an important component, inclusivity, and community. And all of those four things are really about people. And so we're expected to live by these. I think one of the ways that I've been thinking about things lately is that when we have boundaries and expectations and consequences, things work out better. And I think that that's really the thing that drives the culture of the MAA, is that we expect our members, our leaders, any way in which we're engaging with others, whatever we are serving to the public, that we are living out these values in everything that we do. That's the culture, the people.
So one thing that struck me in your answer when you did want to pull us back to the comparison with math and research in the other societies is you singled out education. And I think kind of correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like what you're hinting at is that there really is a two-way street there, that you're really connecting with the recipient, that it's not just I proved a theorem and I'm putting it out on the archive for the universe, but it's really saying, no, I have students in mind and I'm trying to reach them, or I have teachers that I'm trying to reach to help them reach their listeners. So is that a reasonable interpretation?
Very much so. It's about what do we have to offer to the public in terms of mathematics, and how do we engage with people where mathematics is the vehicle. That's how I always think about it when I offer programs, is like I'm engaging with people, and I'm going to create relationships. That's another important thing. It's about building relationships for me when I teach in the classroom, and the way that I'm going to build this relationship not only with my students but have my students build relationships with one another is through this vehicle of math. And that's the thing that we get to use. We're pretty lucky.
Now, as you were going through your career with the MAA, what did you actually learn about the mathematics community from that vantage point? I know that you've worked with so many different faculty and departments and regional sections. Was there one big thing that you found
Okay, so
interesting?
I don't know if interesting is the word. Maybe the word I want to use is encouraging and
Okay.
hopeful. So I am a trained mathematics educator, so my research is on the teaching and learning of mathematics, and I always say it's kindergarten through graduate school. I work with teachers and train teachers to do that. So when I got elected as president, I was worried that the things I was gonna talk about weren't gonna be the things that previous mathematician presidents had been talking about, where they would focus on the mathematics they were doing. So I was a bit nervous, apprehensive, whether people would be receptive to that. By that, I meant, other mathematicians. And I do consider myself a mathematician who focuses on this work. But I guess that was the exciting part for me is how many people would come and say, "Oh my gosh, I've never thought about it this way." The way that I talk about mathematics, the way I teach mathematics. And it just led to new conversations and new collaborations. I was really excited about the fact that several mathematicians who don't generally think about math education were coming up to me and saying, the way that you think about mathematics, the way that you're teaching it, it's innovative, it's exciting. How do you think about it? How does one learn to do that? And so I was just really excited about that I still fit in, I guess maybe is the word I want, and that people were receptive to the work that I do, and especially people who I think so highly of.
So speaking of that phrase fitting in, there's something kind of special, almost magical when a student says like I am a math person or even a mathematician. From your experience, either through research or direct classroom, firsthand experience, how can you tell when a student really is seeing themselves as a math person? What indicates that to you in your mind?
They laugh when they mess up.
It's that simple?
It's that simple. I mean, it really is that simple. I think that when we can laugh at ourselves when we haven't done something correctly, that's when we know we fit in. And I think that that's a big part of being a math person is recognizing that it's hard, that we're going to mess up, and that we're going to find joy if and when we find a solution, and that we can work with others. But I think until people can admit that, oh, learning means making mistakes and making mistakes is part of learning. And if I want to learn math, this is going to be part of it. That's just the way it is.
On the other hand, if you see that a student has a lot of potential as an instructor, what methodologies can you use, whether that's in the classroom or, group work, whatever the case is, to help the student kind of just nudge them a little bit so that they can actually see that they're talented?
Uh, Well, I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do in the classroom, and I'm never afraid to just tell them that and have a conversation with them. I can give you an example of this. It was in a pre-calc class, and the kid always sat in the back, mostly sleeping. But if I made a mistake, some arithmetic error on the board, he always caught it. And then he'd wake up and say, "Oh, don't you mean blah, blah, blah." And so one day I said, "Okay, I really need you because you catch my mistakes. And so I need you to be alert. And then when I have you with groups, I really want you to lead in those groups and help the other students." Totally changed things around with him. So it doesn't take a lot. It just means that we take interest in a person and we let them know we think they have potential. That's all it really takes. There's no magic to this. The student went on and got a PhD in math. But it's small things like that. And I mean, and for me, I remember being in my advisor's office working on some topology thing up on the board. And he said, "You need to get a PhD someday." And I said, "What's a PhD?" But that's all it took. It doesn't take a lot of effort to take interest in a person. It takes very little effort. It takes less work than try to do some magic in the classroom that maybe is not really the sort of thing you want to do. And with that said, there's of course lots of things that we can do in the classroom, and I thrive on that for sure. I want my students excited. I want them frustrated. I want them arguing with one another. I want them excited when they're convinced that, yeah, they're wrong and excited about somebody else's presentation. I get excited when they get excited about, "Oh, that's exactly what I was thinking, but I was thinking about it this way." Or, "Oh, the way you're thinking about it and the way I'm thinking about it are exactly the same." There's so many ways to do that, but we need to give our students time to interact with one another, and we need to let go of the power that we think we hold if we're up at the board lecturing. So, I mean, I love teaching. It's exciting. I mean, I walk out of class on a huge high almost every class period. It's just fun. And if we're not having fun, they're not having fun.
So earlier we were talking about research versus teaching, and of course you do a lot of research. It's just oriented around teaching. So I was very excited to see that you're the PI of an NSF grant, and I want to mention one reason I was excited to see that. I try to follow a lot of AI developments, and one of the big discussions is that large language models and chatbots, all the things we have today, they learn everything in this very indirect way of absorbing text and videos. They're not experiencing the world.
Mhm,
And there's a lot of discussion that we need to figure out how to get AI to do more embodied learning, where they're like physically exploring environment, like,
mhm,
through a robot, for instance.
mhm,
So I saw your grant, and your grant is, or your proposal, sorry, your grant is seems to be about embodied learning through I messed it up. So I saw your grant about embodied learning in a totally different context, not about AI, but about humans. So
mhm.
can you tell us what you mean by that term and what's going
Yeah,
on there?
so all of my I've done very little in terms of like with AI and embodied cognition because I think we still have a ways to go. Right now, AI is mostly about the interaction and the typing things in. Although some people are doing things like in virtual worlds, but that's not my work. That's not the type of work that I do. So my work is really about how we use our bodies to learn and how we as teachers can interpret what students are saying because of their body language. Because our body can convey information that we may not be yet able to articulate through words, but our body can convey it because it has experienced it in some way. And so in my work, I create what I call playground environments, math playgrounds, and I create environments for students to engage in some task and they think they're just playing, which is exactly what I want them to think. And then I have very specific and targeted questions that I create around the playground that I've created. And they tell me what the experiences are, they respond to these things. And then I convert all that to math language. And so that they now have an experience, a real life experience, a fun experience with other people, and it stays in their brain forever.
It's amazing to hear you describe this because when you first started saying how we learn through our body, my first reaction is, what does that have to do with math? Our math is so divorced from our bodies. But then I thought, I've unfortunately, as many of us had, teachers have had the experience of teaching to a Zoom room with like 30 screens, all with their cameras off. And it is the worst thing in the world because you're not getting that body language that you're describing.
Yes, exactly. And so for me, like when I train teachers, I train them to pay attention to students' body language, to integrate, to pay attention to their own body language. So a lot of times I tell my students, put your pencils down, eyes all on me, and ears open. I want you to hear and watch the what I'm doing with my body. Okay. And so that then they can put all of that together. And this has been very natural. Actually want to share this with you because people are always like, how did you learn about this? And I of course learned much later that there was a word, but I am Mexican. I was raised speaking Spanish. And anytime we were in trouble, my mom would say, usen sus cinco sentidos, which means use your five senses. There was nothing about use your head, which is what we tend to say in the English language. It's use your five senses. In Spanish, to think reasonably means that we're using our five senses. And in fact, when we talk about mentally disabled people, what we say is no está en sus cinco sentidos. We don't say they're mentally disabled. We're like, they're not in their five senses. And so for me, once I learned about, and so I've been doing this my whole life. I remember when I student taught, I always would tell students, you have a look. I know you have a question. And they're like, no, I don't have a question. I'm like, it looks like you have a question. No, I don't have a question. Okay. Well, actually, so, I mean, I have always been attuned to this, and I do think it's because of my upbringing and the culture in which I was supposed to be paying attention to the five senses. And then I learned much later that there's actually a whole philosophy about this and embodied cognition. And it really is about how our brain and our body are not separated from one another. It's the thinking does not happen up here. Thinking happens as we engage with something. As we engage with something, it's feeding information to our brain. And in fact, there's research that shows that if we see somebody else engage with something and we've had a similar experience, it fires the same neurons in our brain when we're watching someone do a task as if we were doing the task ourselves. And so the body is a very, very powerful thing. And we're now just beginning to take it into consideration in terms of mathematics. I think for a long time with linguistics, that's really where we borrow a lot of this research from, is from language. But I love it.
This does bring an interesting point of departure with AI, where we have these relationships with these chatbots. And I know there's a lot of interest in using them
Yeah.
as tutors, but that's, as we were discussing, that's completely the opposite of embodied. There are no cues, there is no body language, none of that, because there's no person there. But even if there were, we're just not getting that. So do you think we need to be extra mindful if students are really depending on AI tutors rather than human tutors?
Well, I think that I think here's what's happening. I think that with a chat box, and I don't have experience with chat boxes except for, when I have to deal with something with a flight or something like that. I think most of those chat boxes are teaching us about procedural aspects of a task, and not necessarily the deep thinking that's involved with it. And so for me, like, I have no problem if people are doing something with a chat box, but I think that anytime that we really know something intimately, we know it in different ways. And so, learning how to integrate using Chatbox is one way to think about how to integrate. But what does integration really mean? And how does that extend to the complex setting? What does integration mean there? Because it's certainly not the area under the curve that we tend to use when we're first teaching students about integration. And so for me, it's like, oh, okay, you know that. Let me leverage that and extend that for you. And so I always feel like that's my job as a teacher, is to first figure out where my students are. What do they know? What have they learned from Chatbox? And a lot of times I start like that. Like, what do you know about this concept? Tell me everything you know. Let's put it together. Let's put everybody's ideas together. And now let's formalize that. And so I think we all need people. And if we want to know something intimately, I don't think Chatbox is going to help us to learn things intimately. Concepts, mathematical concepts.
So out of curiosity, do you have any inspiring stories or quirky anecdotes that you wanted to share?
I think another thing that I really learned during my presidency of the MAA was the importance of learning to listen to both sides. And I've always believed that listening is part of communicating, and I really wanted to work on that. And so it's really important to me that I listen to both sides so that everyone feels heard. Because if we don't feel heard, then of course we don't feel like we belong. And that was really, really important to me during my presidency, that my views were not necessarily right and that others' views weren't necessarily right, that we were both probably partially right and partially wrong. And I think those are conversations that we all need to have. How do we listen to different views? I had an opportunity to do that.
To wrap it up, is there one message that you want the global mathematics community right now to take away from this conversation? Or is there anything that's burning that you want to share with everybody?
Well, I think and I think we're getting there. I think we're really realizing that without people, we don't have math, and that really math is about people. How do we leverage math in a way that can really help to bring people together? Whether it's to do research, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's to how do we make it accessible, enjoyable, help others to see the beauty of it? And actually, I liked look at the quirkiness of it, just the silliness of it, the fun part of it. Like, I remember a student, he made these connections in a linear algebra class, and he threw his pencil across the street, or across, not the street, but across the room, and he's like, this is witchcraft. But I mean, just like things like that where we can just experience the fun, the joy, the mystery about mathematics, and just how magical and fun it really is. And I want us to portray it that way to others.
Our conversation was a powerful reminder that mathematics is not just about symbols, proofs, or procedures, but about people, possibility, and the ways we learn together. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow Breaking Math and share it with someone who loves math or education. And as always, just a reminder for folks to stay curious and stay informed of the world around you. Until next time.